The next question is, I feel like I'm doing too much validation and not writing any code. It doesn't feel like any real work to me, causing me stress. Any
Oh,
advice?
spoken like a true engineer if I've ever heard one before.
What to do when a VC
Yeah.
doesn't believe in my idea, forces excessive pivoting, and leaves no time to get anything done?
What to do when a VC doesn't believe in my idea? Sorry, again, is the idea here that this is a VC that's already invested in your company? Because the easy answer here is like if the VC doesn't believe in your idea, and they're trying to get you to pivot, like just stop talking to that VC. Like if they're not your investor, like who cares? Be like, okay, cool. Like you don't believe in what I'm doing, like no problem. Like I won't waste any more of your time, right? And conversely, they won't waste any more of your time. Um, if they are your investor already, then I'm like, why did they not believe in what you're doing? Because they already invested in your company. Um, and then I'm kind of like, I kind of don't understand kind of what happened here. Um, I don't know what terms you kind of agree to, but I've never had terms where a VC, an investor can force me to do anything. Like literally anything, right? I've never had an investor where they can force me to pivot. Nobody can force me to pivot as a founder. We can't force any of our companies to pivot. There's no way. Like even if I wanted to, like there's nothing in our document that says that they have to like do that. And the reverse of that is also like they also like don't have to talk to me. There's like no rule on this, right? So I think if you have an investor who is overly kind of like negative and they're like bothering you all the time and they're becoming a distraction, then I think you need to like, and sometimes founders have to do this. You have to manage your investors. You have to be like, hey, look, I'm really sorry you don't believe in kind of what we're doing. I think this is the right thing to do. And I'm the founder of the company. Here's the reasons why. I'm happy to kind of take feedback on that, but like I'm the founder of the company. And this is what I think is in the best interest of the company. I'm also unable to kind of like take your phone calls like for 4 hours every day. Like I have a company that I need to run, and I'm going to try to do my best to kind of be a good steward of your investment. Like you're setting boundaries and you're just managing them. Like just because they're your investor doesn't mean you're like slave to them or something. Like so, I don't know. I think this investor seems kind of like a newer investor who has probably not been a professional investor for kind of quite a long time, but it also seems like you kind of need to manage them.
Ooh, the next question is, what happens if your validation
Ah,
results is skewed towards one city? For my last 4 days, I had the most signups from Philippines compared to the rest of the cities.
I think you have discovered something interesting. The thing I would try to understand is what's up with the Philippines, right? And why do they want your thing disproportionately more than other places? And there's something really important that if you can find the answer to that, that is likely kind of like a quite important thing to have learned. Um, the Philippines is not like Singapore, which is not like Malaysia, which is not like Vietnam and whatever. And so there's something about the Philippines that what you're doing or saying is resonating with them. And I would try to really find out what that is. Um, Anytime this happens to me, I get very excited because I'm like, ooh, you're on the like cusp of a like learning that could be very valuable. So I would try to figure out what is it about the Philippines and why do they kind of like care about this when other people kind of like didn't? Um, how would I figure this out? Um, this is kind of where user interviews are helpful. Sometimes you can just talk to people in the Philippines and talk to them about if you can talk to them about kind of like why they're interested in this, and then try to talk to some Singaporeans about why they're interested in this. And if you can kind of like get very different responses from people, you might be able to kind of like come up with a hypothesis for why that's the case. But I would shift my focus to try to understand kind of like why this is the case now. But that's exciting.
Cool. The next question is, users ask about the
Yeah.
benefits of the product. We say save time and work efficiently with AI,
Yeah.
but it's not strong as a value prop. How can we refine and communicate this better?
Yeah, this is a great question. By the way, I love all the questions of like, hey, I tried to do this and it didn't work. What do I kind of like do? Because it shows that people are kind of like doing stuff, and these are like much more interesting questions to kind of like answer. Um, Save time and work efficiently with AI is so generic. My gosh, like that doesn't tell me about anything that you're like doing. That's kind of being like, so my value proposition is you get rich and don't have to work hard. It's like, I mean, sounds nice, sounds fantastic, but like it's like too good to be true. You need to kind of explain kind of like why this is the case, and you need to be more specific than this. And so I think that's kind of where I would like. That's where I would kind of like take this is how do you be more specific about kind of like your value proposition. Um, if you a good way to kind of like learn how to do this is just go look at homepages for a bunch of startups and products. Just go look about what they write, and I guarantee you if you go to kind of like a like famous startup, they won't have anything that says like save time and work efficiently with AI, probably. And if they do, I'd be very kind of surprised. But I think a lot of copy tends to be much less generic and oftentimes kind of like more specific and kind of like an insider way. Like, can you talk about your value proposition like somebody who actually kind of like does that thing, you know? Like Pranav used to be a recruiter like before. I'm sure he can talk about how like recruiter saving time in a way that like will show you that like this person really understands recruiters, right? I might write something like save time by hiring the best candidates. It's like, yeah, okay. Like I say that, the like sourcing agency says that, everybody says that, but Pranav can probably come up with like a better thing that is like not generic. And so I think this just sounds too generic to me. It doesn't kind of talk about any kind of differentiation or anything like that, right? It's like one of those statements that is obviously valuable, but kind of like not, no insightful, not insightful, anything like that.
The next question is, what are some common pitfalls that you've observed in how startups approach validation in Southeast Asia?
Good question. The first obvious pitfall is they don't do it. They just like build the thing, right? And so I think that's the easiest, most common pitfall is they don't do it. The second most common pitfall is they do it for like half a second. They're like, I ran a survey, 5 people signed up, validated, let's go build the thing, try to raise money. Like, so, I mean, that's the other thing. So people just don't spend enough time kind of doing this. And I think they treat it like an exercise of like, I know I'm right. I just am trying to kind of find reasons to kind of like show that I'm right instead of the like objective thing where it's like, huh, I think this is like a thing that should exist in the world. Let me go find out if it is. And being very open to the fact that like maybe it doesn't. And in case it's not obvious to people, um, the number of ideas that I've actually built a company around is probably like sub 3% of the ideas I've worked on. Like I've most of my validation kind of efforts have gone to nothing. There was a time when I was validating 3 different ideas a week, and every 2 weeks I was cutting one of the ideas and rotating another one in. And I think I went through like 30 ideas over like a couple of months. And uh, this is like a thing that just like happens. And so I think the common pitfall is I think just people either don't spend enough time or they don't do this, or they're not objective on it. So maybe those are kind of like the three. But by the way, San Francisco people often take a very different approach to this. Their approach is like, especially if you take a multi-time founder in San Francisco who's working on kind of ideas and stuff, they may actually spend like 2 years full time validating ideas. And the reason why is because their opportunity cost is so high, they don't want to get stuck spending 5 to 7 years working on some idea that is like sucks. And by the way, this happens all the time. If you work on an idea and you manage to convince some investor to invest in your idea, then you might get stuck working on an idea for a very long time when after the first year, the idea kind of doesn't work. And you just like wasted a bunch of your time. And so I think a lot of like multi-time founders in San Francisco, that is like their biggest fear. They have no problem working on something for 10 years, but they better make sure that thing has like a lot of potential. And so they try to verify and validate that as much as possible. Pranav, did you validate your idea before you started it?
As soon as you said most people don't validate, I was like, yeah, I did not validate it.
How much
Not
do you regret it?
nearly enough. A lot. I would have saved so much time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, I say this every single time. A bunch of people are going to run off and they're going to make this mistake. I get it. Like, but I think it's really interesting. Everybody who's been a founder before, when they hear this advice, it hits them different, right? Like, I feel like Pranav, I think you came to one of my events. I probably maybe said something like this, but now you hear me say this and it probably hits you very differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
I think it's so easy to intuitively not do it
yeah.
because you think the solution is going to be the solution and
Yeah.
not the problem. But yeah, It's always in retrospect. Please
Yes.
validate, guys. Please do. Don't make the
Yes.
mistake I did.
And by the way, I did too. I did that when I first started. I didn't validate, and I lost kind of like 18 months. The first 18 months when I worked on a startup.
Do you give any additional weight and biases to a founding team's local market knowledge and connections during the validation process?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if you're building a product for the local market, then if you have local market knowledge, that's really important, right? I think a lot of what I think makes startup founders kind of successful is their ability to like understand and build mental models around who their users are. And so, if you have like deep knowledge about the local market, you probably have a better mental model than me, for example, on kind of like some markets. So I don't know if you're in the Philippines, I would hope have a better mental model about Filipinos and what they're interested in, what they care about than I do because I've never been to the Philippines, which I need to go. But like you should have a better mental model. So I definitely put weight to that. It connections during the I mean, connections help. They always do, especially in Southeast Asia. Like that's a business gets done more of this way. But connections, I think, only get you so far. Connections will, in my experience, the founders who kind of have done well in connections got their company started, and so maybe they got the first customer, couple of clients, but at some point they just use up all the connections, so they actually have to like learn how to get people to use their product without connections. Um, or the other part is like later down the road, it's kind of like helpful. But in every kind of like startup founder's journey, there's a version of this where it's like you need to figure out how to do it without connections. And so both are useful. I think the market knowledge is more scalable and long-term valuable, but both valuable, but
Cool. The next question is, what if clients just don't care about your product, even if we see the benefits? Does this mean our positioning needs changing?
I think you should be very self-reflective about whether you see those benefits or not, right? Like this is like one of those cases where it's like, um Pranav keeps not wanting to use my product, but it's so useful to him. And it's like, well, there's an obvious solution to this, which is it's not that useful to him. That's why he doesn't use the product, right? And so I do find founders oftentimes like get into these like funny places where they're like upset at their users because their users are like not using their product even though it's so helpful. And I'm like, most people are like pretty rational. Like if it helps them, they'll use it. Um, and so I would be very skeptical about kind of like um whether they actually see the benefits. Also, it's weird that you say we see the benefits. Like your clients need to see the benefits. It's like if you see the benefits, that's great. But like the really important thing here is the clients need to see the benefits, right? They're not going to care about the product unless they see the benefits. So maybe the game here is you need to figure out how they can see the benefits. Maybe I'll give a quick story here. Everybody knows Google Analytics because it's been around for like decades. I actually met what people don't know is Google Analytics was previously a company before that. I think it was called Urchin. And it was acquired by Google. And I met the founder once. And I remember when I was talking to the founder, I was like, hey, why did Google buy your company? And he was like, oh, yeah, so this is kind of interesting. I was like, he was like, Google makes all of its money through Google ads, but they didn't actually, they were having a hard time getting people to believe that people were buying stuff from their websites through Google ads. And so they needed a tool that could track this person came from Google ads and then they bought something. And so they bought Urchin and it became Google Analytics. So Google Analytics is purely there so Google can demonstrate to people that buying their ads is helpful. That's it. I mean, think about when you buy television ads, they can't do that. Like if I buy a like television ad on kind of like I don't know what the channels are in Singapore, in Malaysia it was like I don't know TV or something like that. Like okay, I buy a TV ad. They're like it went out to this many households. I'm like great, no idea what percentage of them bought, right? And Google basically solved that by buying Urchin and then becoming Google Analytics. So yeah, I don't know. You probably there may be some version of this where you need to kind of like help them see, or maybe it's a positioning thing. I don't know.
Ooh, at what point do you suggest to decide, like, okay, this is time to build, or this is going nowhere, let's go back to the drawing board?
Ooh, I mean, there's always the hard question to ask because I think it's very nuanced and dependent. I think there is. I think the reason why this is like a hard thing to do is because people's psychology is so complicated. Like what you really want to do is you want to be objective and you want to do what the evidence tells you to do, which is if you are working on validation and you can build these experiments and you're getting a lot of people to kind of like sign up and do this thing, then that gives you increasing evidence that maybe you should kind of like build this thing. And if you're not getting this, then maybe you should kind of go to the drawing board. What ends up happening is people just get very excited and they perceive what they're seeing in the world as evidence when it's not evidence. And I've seen this with founders where they're like, oh, I talked to this one person, he really wants my product or whatever. And they spend the entire time talking about the one person that wanted the product. I'm like, wait, how many people did you talk to? They're like they're like 100. And I'm like, what about the other 99? They're like, oh, they didn't say much. I'm just like, okay, man, like you can't just like only talk about the like one person. Um, and you guys might all think you're like, yeah, much more objective than that person. I'm going to tell you, you might not be. Like that person was perfectly rational, right? Um, so I think the thing that you kind of want to do here is how do you kind of make yourself kind of like objective? And the thing that I always used to do was the thing that we learned is we would set some targets. And I'd be like, okay, cool. I'm working on some new idea. I will strongly consider building it if I can get 1,000 people to sign up in 3 months. And that's before I've started anything. That's before I've done anything. And I'm kind of putting a stake in the ground. If you are choosing the goal as while you're in flight, you will choose a goal that is closer to kind of what you think. Right. And so I think there's an honesty around kind of like, okay, I think this is what I'm trying to kind of hit. If you hit the number, you still may not think that's the right thing to build, or maybe you do. And if you don't hit the number, you still may build it, but at least you have some kind of like honesty kind of like there. The thing that I try to do is when I'm hitting those, I set that number. And if I hit the number and I can do it, and there's like, I have like tons of ideas about what to do. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like the feeling it feels like is I have tons of ideas. A lot of the ideas that I'm doing seem to be working. Like every time I do something, something kind of grows or whatever. And that tends to be like more in the maybe this is time to build it camp. The other version of this is I've often worked on ideas and I feel like everything I've done, nothing changes. It's all kind of the same. I'm like running out of ideas. The ideas I have don't seem to be working. Then I'm like, okay, maybe back to the drawing board. And so I think that's the like what it feels like kind of like in both cases here. And if it's your first time, it can be hard to tell, but the more times you do this, you'll like kind of like see the difference here. Actually, the thing I tell people oftentimes is try to validate kind of like try to validate multiple ideas at once sometimes because then you can use the multiple ideas to compare against each other. Like if Pranav worked on 3 ideas at a time, uh, and like if and none of them stand out, then he kind of knows you're like, oh, okay, like they're all kind of like the same. None of these are probably pretty good. But if one of them stands out of the two, then he's like, oh, this one's like way better than the other ones. And if he had only worked on like one of them, he wouldn't know. So that's like another way to kind of tackle this. But ultimately, this is your call. You're spending the like time and effort and quitting your job to work on this. And so this is ultimately your call. But please, please, please try to be objective before you do that.
What made you stop working on
Let's
Singleshift?
do it. Yeah, there's a couple of things here. So one of the things that kind of a couple of things happened here. One is that I actually was working on Singleshift just because I kind of wanted to learn what it was like to kind of like run startups and start startups in Southeast Asia. And so I just was kind of like doing this. And then Matt Ward from Workmate basically I think was like talking to some investors, and investors like, oh, have you met this guy named Hsu Ken? He's like doing a thing. And he cold called me and was like, dude, you're like doing this thing. I'm at Series A. Like, can you just like be my partner at like my thing? And we can kind of like do this together or whatever. And my primary optimization at the time was how do I learn a lot about the startup, like running startups in Southeast Asia as quickly as possible. And he was already doing business in Indonesia and Thailand with the headquarters in Singapore, and the company was like 200 people. And so I was like, oh, if I like go work with him on this thing, then I will kind of like learn that stage of stuff kind of like quite quickly. And so that seemed to kind of make sense to me. And so that's what I was optimizing for. If you want to see what the spiritual successor is, after there's a guy I was working on with at Singleshift. After we left Workmate and Workmate was eventually acquired, he went and remade Singleshift, and it's this. And if you Google it, actually, there's like a Tech in Asia article about how it's like doing 1 million in revenue, and it's just like one guy, and that's basically the guy I worked with on Singleshift. And so he basically revived it, and it's a does 1 million in revenue with one guy, so like he's doing pretty well. I did think though, as I was working on this, that I didn't think it was like a really big venture back kind of like thing, and so um, it seemed like a thing that would be a pretty good business, but I was kind of more interested in like learning about startups in Southeast Asia and then running kind of like a big venture kind of like back thing like I did in San Francisco. So the opportunity didn't seem as kind of like big, um, you know, which sounds weird. I know to a lot of people in Singapore, they're like, oh my God, it makes like $1 million in revenue kind of like a year with like one person. That's not like a big thing. And it's like not by kind of like venture kind of like SL standards.
Next question is, in the early stages, won't the validation be focused on market entry rather than 100 million revenue? Then what is the purpose of the question by pre-seed VC?
Um, I don't know what the VC meant by validation, but my hunch here is I think there's a misunderstanding of what validation is. I define validation as evidence that what you're working on is something that a lot of people want. And so to me, I'm like, I think it's totally appropriate at pre-seed VC. I mean, we ask about it all the time. Um, uh, it's not the only thing that matters, but I want to kind of see evidence, right? So if Pranav is working on an idea and I believe in the idea a lot, then I probably need to see less evidence because I kind of believe in the idea. If Pranav is working on an idea that I don't believe in, I probably want to see more evidence, right? So a good example of this is the one I always use. If Pranav is working on a company that is selling space heaters in Singapore, and he's like, dude, space heaters in Singapore, it's a $3 billion kind of like business. I don't think that's true, right? Like that doesn't make sense to me. And so I'm going to be like, hey, Pranav, that doesn't make sense to me. But I'm wrong about a lot of things. Do you have evidence that you can present to me that you might be true, that might be real? And if Pranav doesn't have evidence, then I'm kind of like, he could still be right, but I'm going to kind of believe what I believe. And if he does have evidence, I'm going to be like, maybe I'm wrong about this. And so validation is kind of evidence. And that's how you should think about it. That's how VC should think about it. Not all of them do because sometimes they think weird things, but that's how they should think about it. That's how we think about it. I don't know what market entry is. 100 million revenue is like not validation to me. That's just like your like growth and all this stuff. So I think that's like a completely different kind of like thing. So I don't know what any of that kind of like has to do with validation as I've defined it. But by the way, I think this is a thing that happens. People like throw around words who don't really have good definitions for it, and then it confuses people. And I think that's the problem, which is why I try to be very kind of like tight about our definitions.
The next question is, I feel like I'm doing too much validation and not writing any code. It doesn't feel like any real work to me. It's causing me stress. Any advice?
Spoken like a true engineer if I've ever heard one before. Okay, I'm an engineer. Pranav is an engineer. I'm going to tell you something that is not very nice to kind of like come to grips with, but it's absolutely true. Writing code is rarely the most important thing you should do at a startup. It's rarely the most important thing. I like when I start companies and when I start companies, like I even do no code stuff and I don't even write code anymore. And I try to I spend like as much time as like not writing code as possible. Writing code is like obvious and easy. Like if running startups was just like a competition of just like being able to like write code, I would like it would be so much easier. The hard work is validation. There's no risk in writing code. You can definitely write the code. You can definitely make the thing. All of the risk in startups is, do people want my thing or not? That's the entire thing you should be obsessed with, right? Like Pranav, you were a CS guy too. I feel like when you were working on your thing, it was kind of like, and now when you think back on it, it's kind of like the only thing you should care about is how do I find out whether people want my thing? And once I've like gone down the path, all I'm care about is how do I get people to want my thing, right? And writing code is just in service of that. That's it. It's just a thing. Like writing code is like, I don't know, making social media posts or writing this like it's just a thing in service. It's just like a skill or thing in service of like the thing you're actually trying to do, which is build something that kind of like people want. And so I love writing code. I wish I could write more code, but when you're in an early stage startup, the only thing that you should care about is validation and kind of like trying to get to grow. And if you need to write, if you think writing code will really help you to do that, which I'm very skeptical if it's an early stage startup, then yeah, by all means write code. But there's no kind of like value in inherent in kind of like writing code. So sorry. Um, it's causing you stress. I think the thing I would suggest here is I think you just have to shift your mindset about what you mean by work. By the way, I used to think this way too. I used to be like, leave me alone. All I want to do is write code. And then my startups went nowhere because I was like, look at how many features I built. And I'm like, nobody wants any of these features and nobody like wants the like core thing. Right. Um, maybe something all the engineers will kind of resonate with is the thing that sucks the most about being an engineer, the thing that is most fun about being an engineer is building stuff and having people use what you built. That is the like high of highs. It's the best. And if you take that sentence, there's two parts to it. There's like people using things you built. The things you built part is like very straightforward. The people using that part is like the very hard part. So spend your energy working on the very hard part. Pranav, anything you want to add here as a CS guy before?
I did want to say so the second startup I did, I built it on no code, even though I could write code, and I think it was the best decision I ever made. And I realized that even up to like 100,000 in GMV, I did not need code. No code held up, and I had all these concerns about, oh, no code's not going to be fast enough or like clean enough. It just didn't matter. My no code solution gave the solution to the problem people had, and that's all they cared about.
And what did you spend all
Uh,
your time doing?
just speaking to customers, understanding what they're looking for, just
Yeah,
basically validation. And I think the doing is easier to tangibly know when you're coding because there's the result. But I think if you're capturing learnings well enough, that'll feel like doing work as well on the validating side.
and by the
Um,
way, doing feels better. Like coding feels better because you have like it's all within your control and it's tangible and nobody's rejecting you. It's like way more comfortable, but it's not as valuable.
Next question is clients want to try my product before considering purchasing it. What you promised is great, but I need to try it out first. Is in quotes. They're big companies, long sales cycle.
I don't technically see a question here, but I see where you're going. Um, I think the thing I would kind of say here is like I would just tell them I'd be like, okay, cool. Like I'm working on the product. I will let you know when I get kind of built and you guys can try it. I would spend more of the validation on kind of people who maybe like don't have to try it. And you can kind of see it that way. Um, so I think to me, it's kind of like, okay, cool. If that's what they need, that's what they need. No problem there. And I would just try to go see if I can get other people to do this. Um, I think the interesting thing that people don't realize is I have actually seen startups get big companies to uh, do it without trying and all of this kind of stuff. And often it's because they are so desperate. They're like, fine, if you say you can do this, we will like use it. Like like when can I like get it? So there is a version of this where it's like if they really need it, they will like jump through lots of kind of like hoops to kind of like do it. But I would then this is partly why startups don't typically start out selling to large companies and they don't typically validate with kind of like large companies. It's just too many hoops, sales cycles along. They need a more fleshed out product and all that kind of stuff, but you can validate in other ways.
All right, so next one is our product is an AI
Yep.
copy editor. Uses feedback that generate ChatGPT can just do as fine. Is the feedback a problem or is it an idea problem?
I don't know what you mean by problem or an idea problem, but I also think that the it's probably kind of generic. Maybe here's the thing that maybe here's the thing that I would kind of say here. Um, every product that is going to be successful needs to be like significantly better than the alternative. And so I think what people are saying is that your thing is not significantly better than the alternative, which is just ChatGPT. Like there's a lot of startups that basically are competing with spreadsheets, whether they realize it or not. I love it because they showed me a competition slide and they're like, oh yeah, this startup and this startup. And I'm like, actually, your competition is like spreadsheets. And you need to be significantly better. So I think what I'm hearing from reading this is basically it doesn't sound like your AI copy editor is significantly better than generic chat GPT, which by the way I use for copy editing. So I think it's pretty good. And there could be two things that are true about this. One, people don't understand how to use your thing such that it's better than generic chat GPT. Or it's not better than generic chat GPT and you need to figure out how to kind of like make it better. What I would suggest there is very hard to compete with generic ChatGPT on copy editing for everything. It's a lot of surface area to cover. Maybe you can make a better AI copy editor for a specific segment of people who need to write copy. And then you can just like focus and down on that and kind of be very kind of like clear and kind of like thin there. So I don't know. Maybe you can make. Oh, that's actually a good idea. There's a type of writing called technical writing, and it is the people that write manuals, and it's very, very kind of precise. And so, if you write an AI copy editor for technical writers, you could probably make that better than generic ChatGPT. And technical writers is like a real profession that is like a job that people have and they get degrees in, and so that becomes like a professional tool. That could be a way to go. That's actually a good idea. Somebody should write this. Somebody should do that.
So the next question is, how can I defend the scalability of my franchise-based micro grocery retail chain to investors? They doubt despite there are broad, similar successful models abroad.
I have no idea because we don't invest in kind of micro grocery retail chains, so I have like no idea. Defend the scalability. I don't know. I guess if you maybe I'll answer it this way, and I'll try to be helpful. If you are a micro grocery retail chain and you're selling and you are trying to pitch to kind of like traditional startup VC investors, you're not going to be able to defend the scalability because it's not scalable by the kind of VC standards. You should pitch to people who kind of are like in retail, who understand these businesses kind of better and that kind of stuff, right? And if they're despite their similar successes, I feel like the thing I always hear from founders is like, yeah, but there's this successful thing. It means that our thing, it works. And it's not true. There are two reasons why it's not true. One is because just because something works in America doesn't mean it's going to work in the Philippines, right? Like they're very different places. And so they're like, not everything is kind of one-to-one. Two, it could be that the investor thinks your model is different from the model that's abroad, right? And so you may think it's similar, but they actually might think they're very different kind of like models, and so that's why they may disagree with you. But I think this sounds kind of like depends on kind of which investor you're kind of like talking to. But different investors have different definitions of scalability. We don't invest in kind of non-tech businesses, and so we would also kind of have this feedback. And there's no amount of convincing that would convince me otherwise. At the end of the day, you're still building grocery stores, so there's no way kind of around that for me. But go talk to an investor who like invests in kind of retail chains, right? And then they'll have kind of a more nuanced understanding of this. So I think you just have to kind of find the right investor for you.
All right, so next question is from Raithwan from Groby. Building distribution network. I have a pilot with 5 manufacturers and 28 retailers, which was successful, but investors want more validation. How can we further validate now?
Yeah, get actual paying customers. They're not a pilot, right? I mean, like again, let me kind of like point this out here is that validation is evidence. The investors are basically saying, hey, I don't believe in the idea enough to invest in the company. Can you show me more evidence to help me kind of like believe in it more? Right? That's what they're kind of, that's basically what they're saying if I'm like translating, right? And pilots are pilots. That doesn't mean they're going to be paying kind of customers. So stronger evidence is if they are not pilots and they are actual paying customers actually doing the thing. Even stronger evidence than that is if you have paying customers who have been using the product for a long time and they have not churned. That's kind of another piece. And so if they're in their first payment cycle, then if they're in their like 5th payment cycle and they haven't churned, that's even stronger evidence. So there's like increasingly stronger evidence.
Hsu Ken, our customer was paid actually, and we are continuing with the 5 manufacturers and 28 retailers.
Yep.
Why we are telling this pilot? Because we don't. We're learning the process. We are building the process. That's why
Yep.
we're telling this a pilot. Okay.
Yep.
But when I sitting with the investor, they ask for the more validation with
Yep.
the more numbers. But we have the limit of the resource actually.
Yep.
So this is our limitation. So now how can we prove the validation? Because manufacturers and retailers are always hungry for our services. Because we are solving the pain point for the manufacturers.
Yeah, this is pretty straightforward. You should grow without needing more money. This happens all the time. Like people are
Right.
always like, oh, I would grow more, but I need more money. No VC ever wants to hear that. It's like a kiss of death. I literally like make up my mind on companies in a final interview where I'm like, what's blocking you from growth? And they're like money. And I'm like, okay, cool. They like don't know how to think about growth like immediately. Because you can, if people really want what you're doing, you can get more customers without kind of like more money, or you at least need to be able to explain why that's going to be the case. So I don't, if investors are like, hey, can you show more evidence of kind of like that this is something people want, and you're like, well, I need money, then they're basically being like, I don't want to give you, you need to show me before I give you money. And if you can't do that, then they're not going to give you money, right? And so you need to find out a way to kind of like do that, or at least show more evidence and all of that kind of stuff before, so that you can kind of get money. One way that you can do this, which I think people don't do a good job of, is sometimes they'll be like, okay, I have 5 customers. I'm like, okay, cool. And then I'm like, how are you going to get more customers? And they're like, I'm going to need money. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you need money for? And they're like, marketing. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't mean anything, right? The thing that investors really are looking for is like, tell me things about your customers that are kind of like common and what you've learned about them, so that you can use that information to kind of get more customers. So if sometimes I talk to kind of startups and they're like, oh, I have 5 customers, and I'm like, okay, like what's a commonality amongst all the like customers? They're like, I don't know. I'm like, okay, well, you just have 5 customers. You haven't actually learned anything, and the learning part is kind of like really important. I'm not saying that's your case, but that's like another thing to do too, is we teach our startups to kind of like, you need to be able to share insights about kind of your customers, and because the insights are what are going to allow you to kind of get more customers. So that's another way to tackle it. But need money to get more customers is not the answer.
Can we show the retention rate as a validation?
I mean,
Customer retention.
you can show whatever you want. I mean, I'm not stopping you from showing whatever you want. I mean, retention is helpful evidence. So yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What's a good annual revenue for a tech-enabled automotive
No
e-commerce
idea.
company?
No idea. I mean, what's a good annual revenue? $10 billion. That's a good, I mean, uh, I don't know, right? I mean, the higher is always better than lower, but early stage company, then it's hard. You're not going to have 10 billion. So I don't know. It's just hard to kind of explain stuff like this. The thing you should actually be more concerned about than what is an annual revenue is your rate of growth. And I wrote okay, I wrote a whole blog post about this. Hold on, let me find it. But basically, I'm making the argument that like I would rather invest in a company that is growing very quickly, kind of like month over month, even though their like top line number is not as high, than a company that has a higher top line number. So if Pranav has a company that's doing $1 million in revenue a year and it's growing about 5% a year, and Leanna has a company that is doing like, I don't know, let's say that she's doing like 10,000 a month, but is growing kind of like 12% every month, I'd rather invest in Leanna's company. Right. And the reason why is because on Leanna's current trajectory, she's going to surpass Pranav's company like quite, in the next kind of like year here. And Pranav's company looks like a company that is like a good business, makes $1 million a year, but is like saturated their market. Like Pranav's company looks like it's kind of not going to go anywhere. It's just going to be like slow growth. And I think for venture capitalists, they want kind of like fast growth. So, I think I would be more focused on kind of like growth rate than kind of annual revenue. And what we tell companies in the batch is you need to grow 5 to 7% every week. And if you grow 7% a week for a year, you will 33x your business. And if you grow 5% a week for a year, you will 12.6x your business. And that is roughly how fast we want our companies to grow. And that's what we do, is like we spend time working with them on that. So growth rate over kind of like an annual kind of revenue is a better indicator for VCs. I've had some really kind of like funny interactions with founders who like companies were doing like 5 mil in revenue and I didn't invest in them. And then they found out I invested in like a company that was like, they came up with the idea 2 weeks ago. They were like, you didn't invest in my $5 million business, but you invested in this company for like 2 weeks ago. And I'm like, 100%. Right. And they were like, please explain this to me. And I basically kind of explained that, right? I was like, look, your company seems like a good company, but it seems like it's kind of like not going anywhere anymore. Right? You've been at 5 million for like 3 years. So like if your company has no chance of being like $100 million in revenue, I can't invest in it, right? And so I'm going to invest in this other thing, which is very early, and we take a lot of risk with that, but like I think has a potential to do that. And the evidence showing me that your company is a good company. And I actually gave them the advice they should not raise money from venture capitalists so that they can just like run it as like a good regular business and keep the profits. But yeah, I've had some funny interactions that way.
What if you have, say, 1,000 signups in 3 months, and then you have no idea how to build or deliver the product or service? She's asking for a friend.
I'm sure you are. Say hello to your friend for me. I feel like this is actually like, Jeanette, are you here?
Like say you have a sign up, you have a landing
Yep.
page, and
Yep.
then you kind of have like, for say 1 hour session of say housekeeping, for example.
Yeah, sure.
And then you have like 1,000 sign up and everyone's signing up. And
Yep.
then you cannot deliver because there's no enough manpower, for example, or there's just no technology that can do the scheduling, for example. To continue to keep the business going,
Yep.
which is to get more signups and more subscription.
Yep.
You would need at some point technology, but you just have no idea how to build it.
Like, sorry, as in you can't imagine an app that does this, or like you're just not technical and cannot build it?
I'm just not technical and I don't know.
Oh, that's a trivial problem. Like, okay, two things you can do
Don't mind
first.
anyone to like say, and like timing's of essence, right? Because people are signing up and people is like asking, can we have this? Can we? And
I have a short-term solution for you, and then I have a long-term solution for you. The short-term solution is just do it manually. Like there's no technology to do scheduling. I'm sure if you sat down with a spreadsheet, you could do the scheduling, right? And so I forget what your product does, and I was just looking it up, and apparently all I got was a TV show called Better Things, which looks kind of old. And
we're building a place where we allow residents to book and share services and experiences.
Yeah.
So
just do it manually. Just give residents a Google form with the things that they can request, and then the Google form goes to you, and then you just make the things happen. Like that's basically what your product does. There's no app, but
and at what point do you like sit down and say we need a proper like a product?
When you can't handle the load manually anymore. Like the Pranav hears this all the time. Software is just for scale. You do not have scale, so you do not need software. And when you need software is when you can't handle it. But when you can't handle it, it means that your product is like so in demand that like it probably like makes sense to kind of like build stuff and kind of take that next kind of like step. So I would just pick one residence and I would offer it to everybody in that kind of like building, and then just have it like Google form. And then anytime somebody kind of needs some service, they can fill out this Google form, or hell, just let them WhatsApp you, and then you just take care of it for them, right? And then you see how that goes, and maybe they do like one person in the building once a week does it, and that's pretty handle. And you're like, okay, I can do 12 of these buildings. And then at some point, if you can get to like 100 buildings and there's tons of requests, then build an app. But at that point, you're kind of like, this thing works because tons of people are using it, and there's like more requests than you can handle. And so actually, maybe this is a better answer to everybody that was asking, like, hey, when should you build the thing when you can't handle the demand anymore?
Okay.
Yeah, right. Hey, Pranav, how are you doing co-founder matching for us?
It is as manual. I swear to God, people have asked me and sent me an email saying, which AI bot are you using for this? And I'm like, it's me. I'm matching about 70 people with each other every week. It's just, I can still handle it. So I'm still doing it manually.
Yeah. You're just sending out the emails. You have a spreadsheet.
Yep.
I think you told me when we first were talking about working at co-founder matching, you're like, I can build this thing. And I'm like, nope, you're just going to do it manually.
Yeah.
Yep. Jeanette, I think one thing you're going to benefit from doing this manually is you learn a lot. Like, Pranav, how well do you understand co-founder matching as like a thing to like run? Because you are basically the like brains and like CPU for the entire thing. Now, if you needed to build a product to do it, you would have a much more informed view of like what that product should do and how it should work than when you initially kind of like did it, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I understand user preferences a lot more. If I just got a bot to make people join. And then I got feedback from them and they said 4. I kind of don't know what to make of that feedback because I don't know what was the difference between them matching and 2 other people matching. And I think I have such a deeper understanding of what people look for and what a good match looks like for them that I've seen my feedback over week on week just go up and up and up. It's just me matching the same thing. Nothing fundamentally has changed. My understanding of the problem has changed for each person at scale still.
And look, Pranav just gets random emails from people who are like, I don't want to meet people like this. And look, it's not like fun or anything, but like he's getting customer feedback constantly, right? And he's not asking for it. It just like happens. And so I think actually for early products, making yourself available to your customers in that way and putting yourself at the center of the product, you actually learn like so much. So I wouldn't kind of like jump so quick to kind of make an app.